In 1997, Comedy Central had about 21 million subscribers. That's it. That was the entire reach of this scrappy little cable network that most people couldn't even find on their channel guide. And the executives at this network, they're sitting there, looking at a short film that two guys from Colorado made for a Fox executive as a video Christmas card. A short animated film made with actual construction paper, cut out with scissors, moved frame by frame on a kitchen table. The characters are crude. The voices are ridiculous. There's a fight between Jesus and Santa Claus. And somehow, by some miracle of early internet chaos, this thing had already been copied onto VHS tapes and passed around Hollywood like contraband. George Clooney, and I'm not making this up, reportedly dubbed something like 700 copies of that tape himself and handed them out to people around Los Angeles. George Clooney, personally dubbing VHS tapes of a construction paper cartoon. That's how South Park started spreading. Not through a marketing budget, not through a network push, through George Clooney's VCR. And the thing that kills me is that nobody at Comedy Central really knew what they had. They knew the short was getting passed around. They knew people were talking about it. Doug Herzog, who was running Comedy Central at the time, saw the potential and commissioned a series. But when they tested the pilot with focus groups, it bombed. Women especially hated it. The show was in genuine danger of being canceled before a single episode ever aired. But here's what saved it. And this is important because it tells you everything about what South Park would become. The internet saved it. In 1997, before YouTube, before social media, before streaming, a construction paper cartoon went viral through VHS tapes and early file sharing. The buzz was already too big to ignore. Comedy Central ordered 6 episodes. And they marketed the premiere with one of the most honest taglines in television history. They called it, "Why They Invented the V-Chip." So tonight, we're talking about how South Park changed pop culture forever. And I mean forever. Not just television, not just comedy, not just animation. We're talking about how two guys from the University of Colorado fundamentally rewired the way Americans engage with satire, with controversy, with the very idea of what a cartoon show is allowed to be. We're going to go through 3 decades of this show, from those paper cutouts on a kitchen table to a deal worth over $1 billion. We're going to talk about the episodes that got banned, the ones that won Emmys, the ones that made real people lose their real jobs, and the ones that somehow, after all the vulgarity and shock value, made you cry. If you're watching this late at night, get comfortable. We're going to be here for a long, long time. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Honestly, just hit that button and let's get into this. Trey Parker and Matt Stone met at the University of Colorado in the early 90s. And the story of how they found each other is one of those things that feels like it was supposed to happen. Parker was born Randolph Severn Parker III in Conifer, Colorado in 1969. Stone was born in Houston, Texas in 1971, but grew up in Littleton, Colorado. They crossed paths in a film class and bonded almost immediately over a shared love of Monty Python and a shared instinct toward provocation. These were not guys who wanted to make subtle art house films. They wanted to make things that made people uncomfortable and then made them laugh at their own discomfort. Their first major collaboration was a short film called Cannibal, the Musical, which Parker wrote, directed, and starred in while he was still a student. It's exactly what it sounds like, a musical comedy about Alfred Packer, the only person in American history convicted of cannibalism. And if you watch it, and I have watched it, you can already see the DNA of everything they do later. The irreverence, the musical ambition, the absolute refusal to take anything seriously while simultaneously putting in an absurd amount of effort. That duality is the whole key to understanding Parker and Stone. They care enormously about craft while appearing not to care about anything. The first Spirit of Christmas short came in 1992, made as a class project. But it was the second one, from 1995, that changed everything. That's the one that Fox executive Brian Graydon commissioned as a video Christmas card for about $2,000. Parker and Stone made it with actual paper cutouts, using stop-motion animation on what was essentially a kitchen table. The characters who would become Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny appeared in crude form, and the whole thing revolves around Jesus and Santa fighting each other. It's rough, it's profane, and it's genuinely funny in a way that nothing else at the time was. That short became one of the first true viral videos, years before that term even existed. People copied it, emailed it, shared it on primitive websites, and it worked its way to Comedy Central, where they saw an opportunity that the spirit of Christmas had already proven existed. There was an audience for this, an audience that traditional television wasn't serving. The pilot episode took about 3 months to produce and cost roughly $300,000. 3 months for 22 minutes of animation. And the process was grueling because they were literally cutting paper, arranging it under cameras, and photographing it frame by frame. When you watch that first episode now, you can feel the handmade quality of it. The edges of the paper are visible. The movements are jerky and imperfect. The whole thing looks like a craft project that somehow ended up on television. And that's exactly what it was. The pilot aired on August 13th, 1997, and everything changed. Not immediately, not all at once, but fast. The first episode pulled a Nielsen rating of 1.3, which translated to about 980,000 viewers. For a network with only 21 million subscribers, that wasn't bad. But by the time Starvin' Marvin aired 3 months later as the 8th episode, ratings and viewership had tripled. People were finding this show, and they were telling everyone they knew about it. Here's what I think people forget about the early days of South Park. It wasn't just that it was crude. Plenty of things were crude. Beavis and Butthead had been crude. Ren and Stimpy had been crude. What South Park did differently was that it was crude and smart at the exact same time, in the exact same joke. Take that first season. You've got an episode like Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, which aired on September 3rd, 1997. On the surface, it's a silly episode about Stan's dog being gay. But underneath that surface, it's actually a remarkably progressive statement about acceptance. Big Gay Al is a positive character. Stan's journey to understanding is genuine, and the show manages to be both hilarious and weirdly touching without ever feeling preachy. In 1997, on a show made of paper, and then just 2 weeks later, you get Death, which aired September 17th, 1997, and it's about Stan's grandfather begging the boys to help him die, assisted suicide, on a cartoon show about 8-year-olds. And again, it's not just shock value. The episode actually grapples with the question. It doesn't give you an easy answer. It lets you sit with the discomfort. And that became the South Park template that would define everything that followed. And I haven't even talked about Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh, which aired December 17th, 1997. Look, on paper, the idea of a talking piece of waste who embodies the Christmas spirit sounds like the most juvenile thing ever conceived. And it is. But it's also a surprisingly sharp commentary on the war over Christmas, on how fear of offending anyone leads to sterilized, meaningless public celebrations. The town of South Park, under pressure from Kyle's mom, removes every religious and cultural symbol from their Christmas pageant until there's nothing left. And the character who saves Christmas, the one who reminds everyone what the holiday is supposed to feel like, is literally a piece of waste. That is the most South Park thing imaginable. The solution to cultural conflict is the crudest possible symbol of common humanity, because everyone, regardless of religion or politics or background, shares that common humanity. I know that sounds like I'm reading too deep into a poo joke, but I genuinely believe Parker and Stone intended exactly this reading, and the fact that they delivered it through a singing, dancing Christmas turd is what makes them different from every other satirist working in television. And then there's season 2, which is where you start to see the show stretching into territory nobody else would touch. Gnomes, which aired in December 1998, gave us the Underpants Gnomes and their famous 3-step business plan. Step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. That sequence became one of the most enduring memes in business culture. People use it in actual corporate presentations. I've seen it in boardrooms. The Step 2 format has been applied to everything from startup pitches to political platforms. And it came from a South Park episode about tiny gnomes who steal underwear from children. The episode itself is a satire of corporate consolidation and the empty rhetoric companies use to justify mergers. But the lasting cultural contribution is that 3-panel meme template. It's probably been seen by millions of people who've never watched a single episode of South Park. That's cultural penetration that most shows can only dream of. I think the moment the wider world truly noticed South Park was when the merchandise exploded. Before the first episode even aired, the buzz from the marketing campaign, which leaned heavily into the show's rebellious image, generated an estimated $30 million in t-shirt sales alone. $30 million in t-shirts. Before the show premiered. That is a genuinely insane number. And it tells you something about how hungry people were for exactly what South Park was offering. It wasn't just entertainment. It was identity. Wearing a Cartman t-shirt was a statement. It said something about who you were and what you thought was funny and what you refused to be offended by. The second season saw viewership explode. Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty, well, you know the title, aired on April 22nd, 1998, and pulled an 8.2 Nielsen rating with 6.2 million viewers. That set a record as the highest-rated non-sports program in basic cable history at that time. Think about that. A show made to look like it was assembled by kindergartners was pulling bigger numbers than anything else on cable that wasn't a football game. And the thing that still blows my mind is that they pulled this off with a deliberate cliffhanger. The previous episode, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty. You get the idea. That one had ended on this massive reveal tease about who Cartman's father was. And instead of resolving it in the next episode, Parker and Stone aired Not Without My Anus, a Terrence and Phillip episode that had absolutely nothing to do with the cliffhanger. Fans were furious, and Parker and Stone thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever done. That right there is the South Park ethos distilled to its purest form. They'd rather make themselves laugh than give the audience what it wants. But the show wasn't just getting more popular. It was getting better. And the way it was getting better is fascinating because it happened in parallel with a technical revolution that most people don't even know about. See, after that first pilot with the real paper cutouts, the show transitioned to computer animation almost immediately. Starting with the second episode of the first season, they were using software called Power Animator to create digital versions of the construction paper aesthetic. But the animation still looked crude and limited. Characters couldn't do much. Backgrounds were flat. The whole thing still felt like paper, which was the point, but it also limited what stories they could tell. The real turning point came before Season 5, which was delayed several months to June 2001, so that the entire animation staff could learn Autodesk Maya. Maya is a powerful 3D animation program, and learning it was a massive investment of time and resources. But it transformed what the show could do. Suddenly, characters could move more fluidly, backgrounds could be more detailed, visual gags could be more complex. And here's the genius part. They used all of this new power to still look like construction paper. The original paper from the pilot had been scanned into a database, and those textures were applied to the digital models. So you had this state-of-the-art 3D animation software being used to painstakingly recreate the look of something a child could make with scissors and glue. That tension between technical sophistication and deliberate crudeness is one of the most underappreciated aspects of South Park's artistry. And I need to talk about the production cycle, because this is where South Park is genuinely unlike anything else in television history. Most animated shows take months to produce a single episode. The Simpsons famously takes about 8 months. Family Guy takes roughly 9 months. South Park does it in 6 days. 6 days from concept to broadcast. That's not a typo. Arthur Bradford's documentary, 6 Days to Air, which premiered on October 9th, 2011, and was nominated for an Emmy in the Outstanding Nonfiction Special category, captured this process in all its beautiful, terrifying chaos. The cycle starts on a Thursday, when Parker and Stone sit down in the writer's room and start throwing around ideas. By Friday, they need a rough outline. Over the weekend, Parker writes the script, which he usually finishes late Monday or early Tuesday. The animators then have until Wednesday night to bring the entire thing to life, and the episode typically isn't finished until hours before it airs. I've watched that documentary probably 5 times now, and the thing that gets me every time is how much Trey Parker is driving the process. He writes almost every episode. He directs almost every episode. He does the voices for Cartman, Stan, Randy Marsh, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Clyde, Mr. Hankey, Jimmy, Timmy, and dozens more. Matt Stone, for his part, voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters, Tweak, Craig, Gerald Broflovsky, Jesus, and Terrence, among others. Together with April Stewart and Mona Marshall handling the female characters, this tiny team produces the entire show. And the 6-day cycle means they can respond to current events almost in real time. When something happens in the world on a Tuesday, it can be in a South Park episode by Wednesday night. No other scripted show in television history can do that. The best example of this speed might be About Last Night, which aired on November 5th, 2008, just one day after Barack Obama won the presidential election. The episode incorporated actual excerpts from Obama's victory speech and depicted the reaction to the election results in a storyline that parodied Ocean's 11. Obama and McCain are revealed to be jewel thieves who used the election as a cover for a heist. The sheer audacity of creating a finished, broadcast-quality episode of television within 24 hours of a major historical event is something that still hasn't been replicated by any other show. Okay, so let's talk about what happened in 1999, because this is when South Park went from being a hit TV show to being a cultural phenomenon that couldn't be ignored. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, hit theaters on June 30th, 1999. And the story behind this movie is almost as wild as the movie itself. The film was produced for about $21 million, which is modest by any standard. But the battle with the MPAA over the rating almost killed it before it reached audiences. The Motion Picture Association kept sending the film back with an NC-17 rating because of its language. Parker and Stone disputed this aggressively, and Matt Stone publicly called the MPAA a bumbling, irresponsible organization. The irony was thick. Here's a movie that is literally about censorship, about moral panic, about the absurdity of trying to protect children from bad words while ignoring real violence. And the censors themselves were proving the movie's point by trying to suppress it. Eventually, the film received an R rating, and even Roger Ebert suspected it only got that rating because it was animated. And look, the thing about that movie that people don't talk about enough is that it's a genuine musical. Trey Parker didn't just throw some songs in. He composed a full Broadway-caliber score. Blame Canada, which he co-wrote with Mark Shaman, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song at the 72nd Academy Awards. A song from a South Park movie was nominated for an Oscar, and the performance at the ceremony was legendary. Robin Williams performed it with a chorus that would gasp at the moments where profanity was supposed to appear. Williams would turn around dramatically, not actually singing the word, while the audience cracked up. And then Parker and Stone showed up to the Oscars wearing dresses. Not just any dresses. Dresses that had previously been worn by Jennifer Lopez and Gwyneth Paltrow on red carpets. And they later admitted they were on acid during the ceremony. The song lost to Phil Collins' "You'll Be in My Heart" from Tarzan, which Parker was not happy about. The following year, South Park parodied Collins in the episode Timmy 2000, and the character of Phil Collins became a recurring target. That's the South Park way. You beat them at the Oscars, and they come for you on cable television. The movie grossed $83 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing R-rated animated film at the time. But more than the money, the film proved something that a lot of people in Hollywood hadn't believed: that South Park could sustain a feature-length narrative, that it could be more than sketches strung together, that Trey Parker could write actual songs, and that audiences would show up in massive numbers to see something this deliberately offensive and this deliberately smart. Before we leave the late 90s, I want to talk about Chin Pokemon, which aired November 3rd, 1999, as the 11th episode of Season 3. This episode might be the most prophetic thing South Park has ever produced. At the absolute peak of Pokemon Mania, when every kid in America was collecting cards and playing Game Boy and watching the anime, Parker and Stone created Chin Pokemon, a fictional Japanese franchise that uses subliminal messaging to brainwash American children into becoming soldiers for the Japanese emperor. The name itself is a crude Japanese pun that I won't translate here, combined with mon for monster. The episode satirizes how media franchises manufacture desire, how corporations exploit children's need to belong to something, and how the frenzy of collecting and consuming is designed to override critical thinking. Here's the thing that nobody talked about in 1999, but that looks absolutely prescient now. The episode shows parents trying to understand the craze and failing completely. The kids can't explain why they want Shin Pokemon products. They just know they need them. The franchise has embedded its marketing so deeply into the entertainment that the children can't distinguish between the content and the advertising. That is, and I want to be really clear about this, the entire business model of children's entertainment for the next 25 years. Loot boxes, mystery packs, unboxing videos, the algorithmically engineered content farms that dominate YouTube Kids, all of it was predicted in broad strokes by a crude South Park episode from 1999. The episode was never aired in Japan, which tells you something about how close to the bone it cut. And I want to mention something about seasons 3 and 4 more broadly, because this is the era when South Park was figuring out what it wanted to be. The early seasons were more freewheeling, more willing to go on tangents, more dependent on shock value for its own sake. By season 3, you can feel the show developing a sharper sense of purpose. The satire becomes more targeted. The character dynamics become more consistent. The episodes start to feel less like disconnected provocations and more like a sustained conversation about American culture. It's not a dramatic shift. It's a gradual tightening, and it prepares the ground for the creative leap that Season 5 represents. Now, let me take you to the year 2001, because Season 5 is where South Park became something more than it had been before. This is the season where the show found a new gear, and a lot of it comes down to one episode. Scott Tenorman Must Die, Season 5, Episode 4. First aired July 11th, 2001. If you've seen it, you already know. If you haven't, I envy you. Here's what happens. A 9th grader named Scott Tenorman tricks Cartman into buying his pubic hair by telling him it'll help Cartman reach puberty. Cartman pays $16.12 for it, and when he realizes he's been scammed, he wants revenge. Now, in earlier seasons, Cartman's revenge schemes were petty and usually failed. He was a brat, sure, a selfish, entitled brat, but he was still fundamentally a child. What happens in Scott Tenorman Must Die changes everything. Cartman's revenge unfolds over the entire episode, and every time you think he's failed, it turns out he was 3 steps ahead. I won't spoil the exact specifics for anyone who hasn't seen it, but the final reveal at the chili cook-off is one of the most shocking moments in television comedy history. It's dark, it's genuinely disturbing, and the shot of Cartman licking the tears off Scott Tenorman's face while Radiohead watches and calls Scott uncool is burned into the memory of everyone who's ever seen it. Parker and Stone have named this as one of their favorite episodes, not once but twice, and it fundamentally changed the show's DNA. Before Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman was an obnoxious kid. After it, he was a legitimate sociopath. The show's creators realized they'd unlocked something. They'd found a darkness inside this character that was both horrifying and weirdly compelling, and they leaned into it. In the seasons that followed, Cartman's schemes became increasingly elaborate and increasingly disturbing. He gave Kyle HIV and tonsil trouble. He started a crack baby athletic association. He manipulated transgender bathroom policies for personal gain in The Sissy. TV Guide eventually ranked him number 24 on their list of the 25 greatest TV villains. Not animated villains. TV villains. Period. But here's what I think is the real genius of what Scott Tenorman Must Die did to the show. Parker and Stone have said that this episode taught them to focus each episode on a single storyline, rather than the loosely connected multiple plots of earlier seasons. The concentrated focus gave the show a narrative power it hadn't had before. Every episode became a more complete story, with a clearer arc and a more satisfying payoff. The crude jokes were still there, the shock value was still there, but now there was a storytelling engine underneath that made everything hit harder. And right around this same time, the show was dealing with one of its biggest internal changes. At the end of Season 5, in the episode Kenny Dies, which aired December 5th, 2001, Kenny McCormick was killed off for real. Not the usual comedic death that gets reversed by the next episode. A real, permanent death from a terminal illness. And he stayed dead for almost all of Season 6. The whole running gag of Kenny dying in every episode, followed by Stan's "Oh my god, they killed Kenny," and Kyle's "You bastards," had become one of the most iconic catchphrases in television. But Parker and Stone felt it had become predictable. They were bored with it. so they just stopped. And what happened next is one of the happiest accidents in the show's history. With Kenny gone, they needed a fourth kid to fill the group dynamic. They tried Tweak, the anxious, twitching caffeine addict. They tried a few others, but the one who stuck was Butters Stotch. And I genuinely believe that Butters becoming a main character is one of the best things that ever happened to South Park. Butters had been floating around as a background character since the pilot, originally named Puff Puff. He got his proper introduction in a Season 3 episode. But it was Season 5's Butters' very own episode that was specifically created to prepare the audience for a bigger role. And when Kenny died and Butters stepped in as the fourth friend in Season 6, something magical happened. He was everything the other boys weren't. Innocent where they were cynical. Trusting where they were suspicious. Earnest where they were ironic. And that contrast gave the show an emotional depth it had been missing. I remember watching Season 6 and being genuinely surprised by how much better the show felt with Butters as a regular. His relationship with Cartman, where Butters is endlessly trusting and Cartman endlessly exploits that trust, became one of the show's richest dynamics. Parker and Stone have said Butters is one of their favorite characters, and you can feel it in how they write him. There's a tenderness to the Butters episodes that the show almost never allows itself elsewhere. Kenny came back in the Season 6 finale, Red Sleigh Down, because fans were upset about his absence. But the damage, or rather the improvement, was already done. Butters was a main character now. The group had expanded, and the show was richer for it. I want to linger on this period for a moment, because Season 5 also gave us Super Best Friends, which aired on July 4th, 2001. In this episode, a magician named David Blaine starts a cult, and Stan enlists the help of Jesus, who in turn calls upon the Super Best Friends, a superhero team made up of religious figures. Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tse, and a character called Seaman. They all team up to save the day. Muhammad is shown on screen, uncensored, with superpowers. He has the ability to shoot fire. Nobody cared. The episode aired, people laughed, and the world kept turning. This matters because of what happened 9 years later, when depicting Muhammad became the most dangerous thing a television show could do. But in 2001, nobody blinked. The episode is a perfect snapshot of a moment before the world changed, and its retroactive removal from streaming is a reminder that cultural boundaries shift in ways nobody can predict. And this leads me to the death of Eric Cartman from Season 9, Episode 6, which aired April 13th, 2005. This is one of those episodes that perfectly captures the Cartman-Butters dynamic at its most beautiful. After Cartman eats all the skin off the boys' bucket of fried chicken, they decide to ignore him completely. Cartman, who cannot conceive of a world where people would voluntarily not pay attention to him, concludes that he must be dead. He's become a ghost, and the only person who can see him is Butters, because Butters wasn't in on the plan to ignore him. So Butters believes he's communicating with the dead, and Cartman believes he needs to make amends for his sins in order to ascend to heaven. The episode is hilarious, obviously. Cartman going door to door, apologizing for every terrible thing he's done, with Butters dutifully by his side as his connection to the mortal world is peak South Park comedy. But underneath the humor, there's something genuinely touching about the Butters and Cartman scenes. Butters' willingness to help, his complete sincerity, his lack of irony, these qualities make him the perfect counterpoint to Cartman's selfishness. And the episode's punchline, that Cartman was never dead and immediately goes back to being terrible the moment he realizes, is both funny and quietly sad. Butters genuinely believed he was helping a tormented soul find peace. Cartman was just being Cartman. And while I'm on the subject of Cartman and Butters, I need to mention Awesome O, which aired April 14th, 2004, as the 5th episode of Season 8. Cartman disguises himself as a robot named Awesome O and ships himself to Butters' house to learn his deepest secrets. But Butters is so overjoyed to have a robot friend that he starts confiding everything, and Cartman can't reveal himself because Butters mentions that he has a videotape of Cartman doing an embarrassing Britney Spears impersonation. So Cartman is trapped in the robot suit, enduring Butters' affection and endless demands for companionship. The episode then takes a surreal turn when movie executives discover the robot and force it to pitch movie ideas. Cartman, stuck in character, starts generating terrible movie concepts, over 2,000 of them, 800 of which star Adam Sandler. It was made in just 3 days, while Parker and Stone were at a wedding in Hawaii. 3 days. And it's one of the best episodes the show ever produced. That tells you something about how creative pressure can produce brilliance. But here's what I love most about Awesome O. And this is the kind of thing you only notice on your 5th or 6th rewatch. The episode is secretly about loneliness. Butters is so desperate for a friend that he accepts a cardboard box with a face drawn on it as his best companion. He confides in Awesome O things he'd never tell a real person. He asks the robot to sleep in his room. He brings it on walks. And none of this is played purely for laughs. There's a melancholy underneath it that the episode never addresses directly, but that you feel in every scene. Butters is a kid who doesn't have anyone. And even though Cartman's motivation is purely selfish, the time he spends as Awesome O is probably the closest thing to genuine friendship Butters has experienced. That's heartbreaking. And it's delivered through a story about a fat kid in a cardboard robot suit. Let's talk about 2004. Because Season 8 represents something of a creative peak for the show, and it begins with an episode that broke every visual rule South Park had ever established. Good Times with Weapons aired on March 17th, 2004, as the season premiere. In the episode, the boys buy martial arts weapons at a flea market and start pretending to be ninjas. And when they're in their fantasy, the animation switches from the standard South Park style to a fully realized anime aesthetic. Detailed line art, dynamic action poses, speed lines. The whole thing looks like it was ripped from a completely different show. And the joke is that this gorgeous animation is depicting the same crude characters doing the same stupid things they always do. It's a commentary on how media aesthetics shape perception. The boys are still idiots. They're still getting things wrong. Butters still ends up with a ninja star in his eye. But because it looks like anime, it feels different. It feels more dramatic. And when the animation snaps back to the regular South Park style, the contrast is jarring and hilarious. That episode showed what South Park could do when it let itself play with form, and it set the stage for all the visual experimentation that followed. Season 8 also gave us Goobacks, which aired April 28th, 2004. This is the one where time-traveling immigrants from the year 4035 show up in South Park looking for work. And the redneck townspeople, led by construction worker Daryl Weathers, start complaining that the immigrants are stealing their jobs. The phrase, "they took our jobs," degrades over the course of the episode into increasingly garbled versions. "They took our gerbs," "they took our gerbs," until it's just incoherent yelling. And that phrase became one of the most enduring memes to come out of the show. The thing about Goobacks that I think people miss is how surgical the satire is. It doesn't just mock anti-immigration sentiment, it also mocks the liberal response. The solution the townspeople arrive at, which involves a bizarre act of group solidarity I won't describe here, is depicted as equally absurd. And the deeper point, that the jobs immigrants take are often jobs nobody else wanted in the first place, is delivered without a single moment of preachiness. The satire does the work. The audience reaches the conclusion on their own. That's the South Park method at its finest. And then you get Woodland Critter Christmas, the Season 8 finale that aired December 15th, 2004. And honestly, this might be the single best example of South Park's ability to subvert expectations. It starts as a charming Christmas special, narrated in the style of a Dr. Seuss story. Adorable woodland creatures in a snowy forest. A manger being built. The coming birth of their savior. It's sweet. It's genuinely heartwarming. And then the show reveals, with no warning whatsoever, that these adorable creatures worship Satan, and their savior is the Antichrist. And it just keeps going. Each new revelation is more disturbing and more hilarious than the last. But the whimsical narration style never changes. The contrast between the gentle presentation and the nightmarish content is what makes it work. And the kicker, the final twist that recontextualizes the entire episode, is that the whole thing turns out to be a story Cartman is writing for his creative writing class. Of course it is. Of course, the darkest Christmas special ever aired came from the mind of Eric Cartman. I've rewatched that episode more times than I can count, and it still makes me laugh every time. And I think the reason is that it's doing something incredibly sophisticated underneath the shock value. It's deconstructing the format of a Christmas special in real time. It's showing you how narrative structure creates expectations, and then it's systematically destroying those expectations while making you complicit because you're enjoying the destruction. That's not just good comedy. That's good art. I want to bring up something about the visual storytelling in Season 8 that I think most people walk right past. The show had been on Maya for 3 seasons at this point, and the animators were getting confident. You can see it in the way backgrounds start carrying more narrative weight. In earlier seasons, the backgrounds were essentially flat, static images. But by Season 8, you start seeing environmental details that tell stories. The way snow accumulates on rooftops. The way light changes between interior and exterior scenes. The way the camera, if you can call it that in a show with no actual camera, starts moving in more dynamic ways during action sequences. The anime sequence in Good Times with Weapons gets all the attention, but the standard South Park animation in Season 8 episodes is quietly pushing boundaries too. And I think this is worth noting because it speaks to something fundamental about the show's philosophy of craft. South Park looks simple. It's designed to look simple. But making something look this consistently simple while telling increasingly complex stories requires an enormous amount of skill. Every character's emotional state has to be communicated through the most minimal possible facial expressions. 2 dots for eyes, a simple line for a mouth, maybe a slight tilt of the head. And yet you always know what these characters are feeling. That's not easy. That's the result of almost a decade of refinement by that point, of animators learning exactly which tiny adjustment conveys anger versus frustration versus sadness. The construction paper aesthetic isn't a limitation, it's a discipline, and the show's emotional range within that discipline is remarkable. I also need to mention The Losing Edge from Season 9, Episode 5, which aired April 6th, 2005. Because it's one of those episodes that people quote constantly without always remembering where it's from. The boys' baseball team keeps accidentally winning games, and they desperately want to lose, so they won't have to keep playing through the summer. Meanwhile, Randy gets into drunken fights at every game, culminating in an epic showdown with another dad. The juxtaposition of the boys trying to fail at sports while their parents turn youth athletics into a war zone is perfectly observed. Anyone who grew up playing organized sports has met a version of Randy Marsh in the bleachers, and the fact that Randy's fighting is animated with more intensity and drama than the actual baseball games tells you everything about where the show's sympathies lie. Now we need to talk about 2005 and 2006, because this is when South Park started picking fights that had real-world consequences. And the biggest of those fights was with Scientology. Trapped in the Closet aired on November 16th, 2005, as the 12th episode of Season 9. In the episode, Stan is identified as having extraordinarily high thetan levels and is proclaimed to be the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard. The episode explains actual Scientology beliefs on screen, with a disclaimer that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." And there's a running gag where Tom Cruise, after being told by Stan that his acting isn't very good, locks himself in Stan's closet and refuses to come out. The double meaning is deliberate and merciless. And then the credits. Oh, the credits. Instead of listing the actual writers and producers, every credit reads either John Smith or Jane Smith. This was done because of Cruise's and the Church of Scientology's known willingness to pursue legal action. The show was literally hiding its own creators' names to avoid lawsuits. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The episode was scheduled for a rebroadcast on March 15th, 2006, but it was pulled without notice and replaced with a different episode. Representatives from Comedy Central claimed it was done as a tribute to Isaac Hayes, who had voiced Chef since the first episode and who had left the show. But here's the real story, and it's one of the saddest things in South Park's history. Isaac Hayes was a Scientologist. For years, Parker and Stone had avoided doing a full Scientology episode specifically because of their respect for Hayes. But eventually, they felt the story was too important to avoid. Hayes' son, Isaac Hayes III, confirmed in 2016 that his father had suffered a stroke that left him unable to speak or make decisions, and that the resignation letter was likely written by one of his Scientologist assistants. Hayes didn't choose to leave South Park. the church made that choice for him. And then, the show killed off Chef in the season 10 premiere in a way that was both a tribute to Hayes and a scathing attack on what they believed Scientology had done to him. They used clips of Hayes' own voice, pulled from previous episodes, and rearranged into new sentences, to create a scene where Chef has been brainwashed by a sinister organization, an obvious reality. It's brutal. It's funny. And it's genuinely angry in a way that South Park almost never allows itself to be. Parker and Stone's response to the whole controversy was classic them. When asked for comment, they released a statement that read, in their typically deadpan style, that they would continue doing what they'd always done. And the following week, the Los Angeles Times had dubbed the whole saga Closetgate. But the Scientology fight was just the warm-up for what came in 2010. And this is where things got genuinely scary. Episodes 200 and 201, which were the 5th and 6th episodes of the 14th season, brought back every celebrity South Park had ever mocked and centered the plot around the idea of depicting the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Now, South Park had actually shown Muhammad before, in the season 5 episode, Super Best Friends, which aired July 4th, 2001, where he appeared as part of a superhero team alongside Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Joseph Smith, and Lao Tse. That episode caused almost no controversy at the time, but by 2010, the world had changed. The Danish cartoon controversy of 2005, where European newspapers published cartoons of Muhammad that sparked global protests, had made depicting Muhammad an incredibly loaded act. And Parker and Stone, being Parker and Stone, pushed directly into the tension. They were frustrated that they could show Jesus doing ridiculous things and Buddha snorting cocaine, but Muhammad was off limits. Between the airings of 200 and 201, a website called Revolution Muslim posted what amounted to a veiled death threat against Parker and Stone, warning them they risked violent retribution. This was not a joke. This was a genuine threat, and Comedy Central, understandably terrified, intervened in a way that fundamentally altered the episode. When 201 aired, the network had censored not just the image of Muhammad, but the entire final speech about free expression and intimidation. The 2-minute moral conclusion was completely bleeped out. The irony was crushing. An episode about the danger of allowing threats to suppress free speech was itself suppressed by those threats. Both episodes were pulled from circulation. They can't be found on any streaming platform. Super Best Friends was retroactively pulled too. And the depiction of Buddha snorting cocaine in the episodes caused the government of Sri Lanka to ban the entire show. 5 episodes of South Park remain permanently unavailable, more than any other mainstream American television series. I think about this a lot. I think about what it means that the most dangerous thing South Park ever did wasn't the vulgarity, or the religious mockery, or any of the thousands of things that offended millions of people over the years. The most dangerous thing was insisting on equal treatment. The show's entire philosophy is that nothing is sacred, and everything is fair game. And when they encountered the one thing they weren't allowed to satirize, they ran straight at it, and they paid a real price. But let me bring us back to the creative side, because in between these wars with real-world power structures, the show kept getting better at what it does. Season 9's Best Friends Forever, which aired March 30th, 2005, tackled the Terry Schiavo case mere hours before Schiavo actually died. The episode was an incredibly sensitive piece of satire that used Kenny's death as a parallel to the real-world debate about the right to die. And it won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, the show's first win in that category. This made South Park the 4th primetime animated show ever to win, behind The Simpsons, King of the Hill, and Futurama. And notably, it was the first cable series to take the prize. Then came Make Love Not Warcraft in Season 10, Episode 8, which aired October 4th, 2006. If you're of a certain age, this episode is probably burned into your brain. The boys become obsessed with World of Warcraft and are terrorized by a griefing player who keeps killing them. Their solution is to spend weeks grinding in the game, killing boars in the forest to level up enough to fight back. And the episode shows them physically deteriorating as they play, becoming overweight, acne-covered, and pale from never leaving their computers. What made this episode special, beyond the writing, was a genuine collaboration with Blizzard Entertainment, the company that made World of Warcraft. Blizzard provided actual game footage and machinima that was integrated seamlessly into the episode. The game scenes look real because they are real, and the episode manages to mock gaming culture, while also clearly loving it. The boy's dedication to defeating the Griefer is portrayed as both pathetic and heroic, and the tension between those two readings is what makes the whole thing sing. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2007, the show's second win. Parker and Stone listed it as their third favorite episode when surveyed in 2015. The Imagination Land trilogy from season 11, episodes 10, 11, and 12, which aired across October 2007, was originally conceived as a movie. But because the story featured so many copyrighted characters from other properties, they decided to keep it as a television event instead. The three-part saga imagined a world where all of humanity's fictional creations live, and terrorists attack this world in an act of imaginative terrorism. It's ambitious in a way South Park rarely allows itself to be. The scope is enormous. The philosophical questions about the nature of imagination and the power of fiction are genuine. And the B-plot, where Cartman tries to force Kyle to fulfill a bet through the legal system, is one of the funniest things the show has ever done. The Imagination Land trilogy won the 2008 Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program for programming 1 hour or more. That's a different category than the one the show usually competed in, and it was the only time South Park was ever nominated for it. Production had begun in July 2007, nearly 3 months before the final episode aired, which was wildly unusual for a show that normally makes episodes in 6 days. Then there's Margaritaville, Season 13, Episode 3, which aired March 25th, 2009. This is the financial crisis episode, and it's one of the most intellectually ambitious things South Park has ever done. The episode treats the American economy as a literal religion, with Randy Marsh preaching austerity as a form of worship, and the Margaritaville blender serving as a metaphor for the housing bubble and consumer debt. Meanwhile, Kyle walks through town forgiving debts, in an obvious parallel to Jesus. The episode takes a genuinely complex economic crisis and makes it not just understandable, but viscerally felt. When Parker and Stone were deciding which episode to submit for the Emmy that year, they chose Margaritaville, specifically because they'd gotten strong feedback from older viewers, and they figured the Emmy voters skewed older. They were right. It won. And while we're in this era, I need to talk about You Have Zero Friends from Season 14, which aired April 7th, 2010. This is the Facebook episode, and it's a perfect example of South Park's ability to capture the anxiety of a cultural moment before anyone has figured out how to articulate it. Stan gets a Facebook profile against his will and is immediately overwhelmed by friend requests, game invitations, and the social pressure to maintain a digital identity. The episode parodies the 1982 film Tron, with Stan literally getting sucked into the Facebook world and having to fight his way out. Trey Parker came up with the episode after he himself signed up for Facebook and got sucked into it, then found people getting angry when he didn't respond. And here's what makes this episode more than just a timely joke. It asks a question that wouldn't become a mainstream concern for another 5 or 6 years. What happens when your online identity starts to feel more real than your actual life? Stan's Facebook profile has its own needs, its own demands, its own social obligations, and maintaining it becomes a full-time job that takes him away from the real world. In 2010, that felt like exaggeration. By 2015, it felt like documentary footage. South Park saw it coming. Again, I actually think about this episode a lot in the context of what social media has become. The scene where Stan's friend count becomes the measure of his social worth, where having 0 friends online is treated as a kind of social death. That's not satire anymore. That's just how things work for a lot of people, especially young people. South Park didn't predict social media's specific evolution, but it predicted the emotional reality of it, the way digital connectivity can become a form of imprisonment. And it did it through a Tron parody about a 10-year-old kid. That's the magic trick. And I should mention the Coon and Friends trilogy from season 14, episodes 11 through 13, which aired across late October and early November 2010. This is where the superhero thread that had been running through the show finally came to a head. The boys have been playing superhero, with Cartman as the Coon, and the others forming Coon and Friends. But the trilogy turns genuinely dramatic when Mysterion's identity is revealed to be Kenny, and his superpower, his actual canonical superpower, is that he can't die permanently. Every time Kenny is killed, he wakes up in his bed the next morning, fully restored, and nobody remembers that he died. Think about what that means for the character. For 13 seasons, Kenny's recurring death was a running gag, a joke, something the audience laughed at. And then the show reframes it as a cosmic curse. Kenny experiences every death. He feels the pain. He remembers it, and nobody else does. His friends watch him die, and then forget it ever happened. The darkest possible reading of the show's most famous gag turns out to be the canonical one. And Kenny, this kid from a poor family who wears a hood that muffles everything he says, who has been treated as the least important of the four main characters for over a decade, is revealed to be carrying the heaviest burden of any of them. I remember watching Mysterion Rises and feeling my entire understanding of Kenny shift. Every death scene I'd ever laughed at suddenly felt different. Not unfunny exactly, but layered in a way I hadn't expected. That's what South Park does at its best. It takes something you thought you understood, something you'd been laughing at for years, and reveals a dimension to it that changes everything. And it does it without ever feeling like it's lecturing you. The reveal is dramatic, but it's also funny. Kenny's frustration at nobody remembering his deaths is both tragic and hilarious. Both readings coexist. Both are valid. And the tension between them is where the magic lives. I want to pause here and talk about something that I think is the most underappreciated aspect of South Park's cultural impact, and that's Trey Parker's music. We already talked about Blame Canada and the Oscar nomination, but Parker has been writing songs for the show since the beginning, and many of them are genuinely excellent pieces of musical composition. Kyle's Mom's A Big Fat Bee from the movie is a full-scale production number. The show regularly incorporates musical sequences that work as both parody and genuine entertainment, and the songs are catchy, annoyingly, persistently catchy. You hear them once, and they're stuck in your head for days. But the real proof of Parker's musical talent came not from South Park, but from Broadway. The Book of Mormon, which Parker and Stone created with Robert Lopez, opened on March 24th, 2011, and proceeded to win 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. 9, including Best Original Score and Best Book of a Musical. A show created by the guys who make South Park won the most prestigious award in American musical theater, and it deserved it. The Book of Mormon is legitimately brilliant as a piece of theater. The songs are complex and emotionally resonant. The satire is sharp, but compassionate, and it's been seen by over 20 million audience members worldwide with more than 12,000 performances. I think about what that means for South Park's legacy. These are not guys who stumbled into success with toilet humor. These are genuine artists who happen to express themselves through characters who are deliberately crude. There's a sophistication underneath the vulgarity that a lot of critics missed for years. And the Book of Mormon was the moment when the wider cultural establishment had to reckon with the fact that Trey Parker might be one of the most talented musical theater composers of his generation. Now, the show's politics are something I need to address, because they're complicated and often misunderstood. Parker and Stone have at various points described themselves as libertarian, though they always add qualifications. Stone once said his political philosophy boiled down to the idea that if anyone is telling him what he should do, they need to really convince him it's worth doing. Parker described both himself and Stone as pretty middle ground guys who find as many things to mock on the left as on the right. And if you watch the show with this lens, it makes perfect sense. South Park's politics aren't conservative or liberal. They're anti-extremism. The show's consistent target across 3 decades is not a particular ideology, but the act of taking any ideology too seriously. Hypocrisy is the ultimate sin in the South Park universe. The show will defend free speech to the death, but mock the person screaming the loudest. It'll skewer corporate greed and then turn around and skewer the activists protesting it. The term South Park Republican entered the political lexicon, but it's a misleading label. The show is more accurately described as South Park contrarian. Whatever the prevailing orthodoxy of the moment, South Park is going to push against it. And this isn't just an abstract philosophical position. It plays out in specific episodes in fascinating ways. Take the way the show handles religion. South Park has mocked Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Mormonism, Scientology, Buddhism, and atheism with equal ferocity. The Mormon episode from Season 7, All About Mormons, which aired November 19th, 2003, walks through the founding of the Mormon Church in a way that makes the religion's origin story sound absurd, with a repeated refrain of dum 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 playing over the historical reenactments. But then, in the final scene, the Mormon kid turns to the other boys and delivers a speech about how his religion makes his family happy and gives them purpose. And if that makes him dumb, he doesn't care. It's the most emotionally honest defense of religious faith the show has ever offered, and it comes immediately after the most savage critique. Both are sincere. Both are part of the same argument, and the audience has to figure out for themselves where they land. That's not lazy centrism. That's genuine philosophical engagement. The best example of this might be Douche and Turd, which aired October 27th, 2004, during the week before the presidential election. The episode depicts a school mascot election where the only choices are a giant douche and a turd sandwich. Stan refuses to vote because he sees both options as terrible, and the episode essentially argues that every election is a choice between two bad options. But that voting still matters, because the alternative is worse. It's a deeply cynical position that also manages to be pragmatic and weirdly hopeful. That's the South Park political philosophy in 22 minutes. But I have to be honest about the times South Park got it wrong, because I think the show's willingness to eventually admit mistakes is as important to its legacy as the jokes themselves. The Man Bear Pig episode, Season 10, Episode 6, which aired April 26, 2006, mocked Al Gore's climate change advocacy by portraying him as a delusional fool chasing an imaginary creature. At the time, climate skepticism was common in mainstream discourse, and the episode reflected that. But as the scientific consensus on climate change became overwhelming, the episode aged terribly. And here's what South Park did about it. In Season 22, Episodes 6 and 7, Time to Get Cereal, and Nobody Got Cereal, which aired in November 2018, the show brought Man Bear Pig back. Except this time, Man Bear Pig was real. It was destroying the town, and the boys had to go to Al Gore and apologize for not believing him. Gore wanted them to be really, truly cereal about their apology, and the episode didn't just admit the mistake. It explored why people ignore warnings about slow-moving catastrophes, how short-term comfort makes people bargain with existential threats rather than confront them. Al Gore himself appeared on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and praised the episode, calling it a strong statement. That willingness to look back at their own work and say, "We were wrong," is rare in any creative endeavor. It's almost unheard of in comedy, and it speaks to something genuine about Parker and Stone's relationship with their own show. They're not protecting a brand, they're having a conversation. And sometimes conversations require you to change your mind. And speaking of the show's emotional capacity, I need to talk about Raisins from Season 7, Episode 14, which aired December 10th, 2003. Stan gets dumped by Wendy, and the boys take him to Raisins, a Hooters-style restaurant staffed by elementary school girls, to cheer him up. Stan spirals into a full goth phase, wearing black, writing terrible poetry, and hanging out with the goth kids. And then Butters, who also gets his heart broken in the episode, delivers what might be the single most beautiful speech in the show's history. I won't quote it exactly, but the essence is this. Butters says he'd rather feel sad than feel nothing, that the pain of a broken heart is better than being numb, because at least it means you felt something real. It's a moment of such unexpected emotional maturity that it stops the episode cold. And it comes from Butters, the most innocent character on the show, the one everyone else dismisses. I think about that speech a lot. I think about how a show that regularly features crude humor and shock value can also produce a moment that is genuinely, unselfconsciously wise. And I think the secret is that South Park earns these moments through the contrast. If the show were always trying to be deep the depth wouldn't land. But because the depth appears in the middle of absurdity, surrounded by jokes that are deliberately lowbrow, it catches you off guard. Your defenses are down, you're laughing, and then Butters says something that makes you stop laughing and think. And because you weren't expecting it, the thought hits harder than it would in a show that's always asking you to think. That's the South Park trick. That's always been the South Park trick. And after nearly 30 years, it still works. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a video about a cartoon show. This is about something bigger. It's about how one show, made in a way that shouldn't work, with a production schedule that seems impossible, by two guys who never set out to change anything, managed to reshape the entire landscape of American culture. Let me talk about what happened when South Park tried to reinvent itself, because that's its own story. Seasons 19 and 20 represent the show's biggest creative gamble. After 18 seasons of largely standalone episodes, Parker and Stone decided to go serialized. Season 18 had flirted with it, connecting episodes in subtle ways. But Season 19, which aired in 2015, went all in. The entire season told a single, interconnected story about the gentrification of South Park. The town gets a Whole Foods. Political correctness becomes the dominant ideology, and a new character, PC Principal, embodies the aggressive, uncompromising version of progressive politics that was ascendant in the culture at the time. I should mention that Season 18, which aired in 2014, was the test run for serialization. Episodes had continuity threads running through them, with changes from one episode carrying over to the next. The boys got Lord's music in one episode, and it connected to Randy being Lord in another. The town's gentrification was a gradual process across multiple episodes. It wasn't full serialization. It was more like what showrunners call serialization light. But it worked well enough that Parker and Stone felt confident going further. PC Principal is one of the show's most interesting creations. He's not a villain, exactly. He genuinely believes in the principles he's enforcing. But his methods are authoritarian, and the show uses him to explore the tension between good intentions and bullying enforcement. What makes him work as a character is that the show doesn't simply dismiss him. He's allowed to be right sometimes. He's allowed to have a point, and the other character's discomfort with him isn't always presented as justified. That complexity is what separates South Park from lesser satire. Season 20 doubled down on serialization in 2016, weaving together storylines about the presidential election, internet trolling, nostalgia, and the member berries, which were anthropomorphic berries that spoke in nostalgic catchphrases and represented the dangerous appeal of yearning for a simpler past. But Season 20 also hit a wall that nobody saw coming. Parker and Stone had written the season assuming Hillary Clinton would win the election. When Donald Trump won instead, they had to frantically retool episodes mid-production. Some storylines got dropped. The member berries disappeared from later episodes. The season never quite found its footing. I remember watching it in real time and feeling the strain. The ambition was admirable. The execution was inconsistent. And I think Parker and Stone learned something important from it. They pulled back from full serialization in the seasons that followed, returning to more standalone episodes with lighter continuity threads. Sometimes the most valuable creative experiments are the ones that don't fully work, because they show you where the boundaries are. And now, I want to talk about something that gets overlooked when people discuss South Park's cultural impact, the show's influence on other media, and its expansion beyond television. The video games are genuinely remarkable achievements. South Park, The Stick of Truth, released in 2014, was developed by Obsidian Entertainment in collaboration with Parker and Stone, who wrote the script and voiced the characters. It sold over 5 million copies, and was praised as one of the best licensed games ever made. It looked exactly like an episode of the show, and playing it felt like being inside one. The rights to the game had originally been with THQ, but when THQ went bankrupt in early 2013, Ubisoft acquired them. The sequel, South Park: The Fractured But Whole, was developed by Ubisoft San Francisco and released in 2017. Both games succeeded because Parker and Stone treated them with the same creative investment they bring to the show. These weren't cynical cash grabs. They were genuine extensions of the South Park universe, with the same quality of writing and the same commitment to pushing boundaries. I want to go deeper on the video games for a moment, because the way Parker and Stone approached them is instructive. When the Stick of Truth was in development, originally under THQ before their bankruptcy forced the rights to Ubisoft, Parker and Stone insisted on being directly involved. They wrote the script, they voiced the characters, they consulted on the game design, and the result was something that had never really been done before in licensed gaming. A game that was genuinely indistinguishable from the source material. When you play the Stick of Truth, it looks and sounds exactly like an episode of South Park. The animation is identical, the humor is identical, the level of detail in the world building, the background gags, the environmental storytelling is on par with the show itself. It sold over 5 million copies, and critics praised it, not just as a good licensed game, but as a good game, period. The sequel, The Fractured But Whole, shifted development from Obsidian to Ubisoft San Francisco, but maintained the same level of creative involvement from Parker and Stone. It tackled superhero culture with the same irreverence that the show brings to everything. And both games expanded the South Park universe in ways that television couldn't. You could explore the town, walk into houses, read text messages between characters. The games added lore and context that enriched the viewing experience, and vice versa. It was a genuinely symbiotic relationship between media forms, and it worked because the people who understood the property best were directly involved in translating it. And then there's Team America, World Police, the 2004 puppet movie that Parker and Stone made during a break from South Park. Inspired by Jerry Anderson's Super Marionation, the film used marionette puppets to satirize American foreign policy and celebrity activism during the Bush era. The production nearly killed both men. The deadline pushed them to their absolute limits, and the film was barely completed in time for its October 15th release. It wasn't a box office smash. It didn't win awards, but it became a cult classic, and it proved that Parker and Stone's sensibility could work in formats beyond animation. I need to circle back to the characters, because the character work on South Park is far more sophisticated than most people give it credit for. Let's talk about Randy Marsh, because his evolution is one of the most fascinating in television history. In early seasons, Randy was barely there. He appeared in Season 1's Volcano as Stan's dad, but he wasn't even established as Stan's father yet. Through Seasons 1 and 2, he was a background presence, a geologist, a responsible adult, boring. But starting around Season 3, Parker and Stone started giving him more screen time. By Season 8, he was driving B-plots. And in Season 9's The Losing Edge, where the boys try to lose at baseball and Randy becomes a drunken spectator brawling with other parents, he absolutely stole the episode. The image of Randy, shirt off, swinging at other dads while the boys play intentionally terrible baseball, is one of the most iconic visual gags in the show's history. From that point on, Randy's rise was unstoppable. He went from being the straight man in a world of chaos to being the source of the chaos. Episodes increasingly centered on his misadventures, with the boys relegated to supporting roles or absent entirely. By the time you get to Tegrity Farms in later seasons, where Randy moves the family to a marijuana farm, he's essentially the show's main character. And despite being written as an idiot, despite his schemes always failing, despite his total lack of self-awareness, there's something deeply lovable about Randy Marsh. I think it's because Parker voices him with genuine enthusiasm. You can hear the joy in the performance. Randy is having the time of his life, even when everything is falling apart around him, and that energy is infectious. And here's where I want to get a little philosophical, because I think Randy Marsh represents something important about what South Park is saying about adult life. Randy is a man with a doctorate in geology who acts like a child. He's impulsive, selfish, attention-seeking, and completely unable to learn from his mistakes. And yet, he's also a loving father who tries, in his own misguided way, to do right by his family. He's not a bad person. He's a weak person. And the show uses that weakness to ask uncomfortable questions about the gap between who adults present themselves as and who they actually are. Think about that for a second. The most popular character on a show about 4 8-year-old boys is a middle-aged dad. And the reason he's the most popular is that adult viewers recognize themselves in him. That's not crude humor. That's insight. I should also mention the pandemic two-parter from Season 12, Episodes 10 and 11, which aired in October 2008. In these episodes, the boys try to capitalize on the sudden popularity of Peruvian pan flute bands by starting their own band, and end up accidentally preventing the Peruvian flautists from maintaining their mystical barrier that holds back giant guinea pig monsters. Meanwhile, Randy documents everything with his new camcorder in a pitch-perfect parody of the found footage film Cloverfield, which had come out earlier that year. These episodes are interesting, not because they're the best South Park has ever produced, but because they show the show working at multiple levels simultaneously. The A plot about guinea pig monsters is absurd. The B plot about Randy filming everything is a sharp commentary on the narcissism of the YouTube age. The subplot about Peruvian musicians being rounded up by the government is an unexpectedly pointed critique of how immigrant communities are treated. And the visual style of the guinea pig sequences, using actual footage of guinea pigs composited against miniature cityscapes, is unlike anything else the show has done. It's messy, it's ambitious, it doesn't entirely work. But the willingness to try something that strange, that far outside the show's usual comfort zone, is part of what keeps South Park vital. You know what's funny? I keep coming back to this idea that South Park's best quality is its willingness to fail. The 6-day production cycle means there's no time for perfectionism. And some episodes are clearly better than others. But even the weaker episodes are trying something. They're swinging for something ambitious and falling short, rather than playing it safe and hitting a mediocre target every time. And I think that willingness to fail in public, to put out an episode that doesn't quite work, and then come back the next week with something better, is what separates South Park from shows that are more consistent, but less exciting. The Cartoon Wars two-parter from Season 10, which aired in April 2006, deserves its own discussion because it's one of the most meta things South Park has ever done. The episodes are ostensibly about Family Guy planning to air an image of Muhammad, and Cartman's schemes to get the show canceled entirely. But the real target isn't Family Guy's content, it's Family Guy's writing style. The episodes make the case that Family Guy's comedy, which relies on random, disconnected cutaway gags, is fundamentally lazy compared to comedy that grows organically from character and situation. The writing staff of Family Guy is depicted as a group of manatees pushing around idea balls in a tank, randomly generating jokes by collision. After the episodes aired, Parker and Stone said they were contacted by the staff of The Simpsons and the staff of King of the Hill. Both shows praised them for the critique. The staff of King of the Hill reportedly told Parker and Stone they were doing God's work. And Parker noted that The Simpsons team's hatred of Family Guy ran even deeper than his own. The episode included a scene where Cartman meets Bart Simpson, and they bond over their shared dislike of Family Guy. It was a moment of solidarity between competitors, and it revealed something interesting about the hierarchy within animation. There was South Park, which the industry respected. There was The Simpsons, which the industry revered. And there was Family Guy, which the industry had complicated feelings about. Cartoon Wars made those feelings public. And look, I have my own take on this. I think South Park's critique of Family Guy was valid, but also self-serving. South Park makes comedy that requires you to pay attention. Every joke builds on what came before. The characters have consistent personalities that inform the humor. Family Guy makes comedy that you can drop into at any moment and understand. Both approaches have their place, but South Park's approach requires more effort from the writers and more engagement from the audience. And that's what made Cartoon Wars resonate. It wasn't just criticism, it was a statement of values. Let me talk about the show's relationship with censorship, because it's one of the most important and most complicated threads in South Park's history. From the very beginning, Parker and Stone have been fighting with standards and practices at Comedy Central, and their approach to these fights is genius. They'll put something in the script that's wildly offensive, knowing it'll be flagged, so that the thing they actually want to keep, which is slightly less offensive, gets approved by comparison. It's a negotiation tactic, and both sides know it's happening, and it still works. But sometimes, the fights are real. The Bloody Mary episode from Season 9, Episode 14, which aired December 7th, 2005, on the eve of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, depicted a statue of the Virgin Mary that Randy believes can cure his alcoholism. The Catholic League demanded an apology. Bishop William Skillstad, president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, sent a letter to Viacom's CEO calling the episode extremely insensitive. When Comedy Central re-aired all of Season 9 on December 28th, Bloody Mary was absent. In New Zealand, Catholic bishops, along with leaders from the Council of Christians and Muslims, lobbied media conglomerate CanWest to block the episode from airing on the music channel C4. CanWest refused and actually moved the airing up to take advantage of the publicity. Prime Minister Helen Clark called the episode revolting, but defended the network's right to broadcast it. New Zealand's Broadcasting Standards Authority later rejected all complaints, ruling that the episode's farcical, absurd, and unrealistic nature did not breach standards of good taste. And this is the pattern that repeats throughout South Park's history. The show does something outrageous. Powerful institutions push back. The public discourse plays out exactly the way Parker and Stone seem to have anticipated. And the show survives. And the boundaries of acceptable content on television expand just a little bit more. South Park didn't single-handedly create the modern landscape of adult animation, but it pushed the door open wider than any other show. Without South Park proving that audiences would tolerate and even embrace genuinely offensive content wrapped in genuine intelligence, shows like Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, and the entire adult animation renaissance might look very different. Now, I want to spend some time on the show's visual evolution, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of South Park. People look at the show and think it looks the same as it did in 1997. It doesn't. Not even close. The difference is subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. The pilot was actual paper, cut, arranged, photographed. The edges were rough. The colors were inconsistent. The movement was limited to what you could do by physically moving pieces of paper under a camera. Starting with Season 1, the switch to Power Animator allowed for smoother movement and more consistent coloring, but the aesthetic was still deliberately primitive. Characters moved in limited ways. Backgrounds were simple. The palette was restricted. The Maya transition before Season 5 opened everything up. Characters could express more emotion through subtle body language. Backgrounds became more detailed and atmospheric. Night scenes actually looked like night. Snow had texture, and the range of what the show could depict expanded enormously. The anime sequence in Good Times with Weapons would have been impossible with the earlier tools. The machinima integration in Make Love Not Warcraft required the technical capability to seamlessly blend game footage with traditional animation. The increasing visual ambition of the show's spectacle episodes, like Imagination Land and the Pandemic specials, relied entirely on the capabilities that Maya provided. But here's what I love most. Despite all this technical advancement, South Park still looks like paper. The characters still move in that distinctive, slightly jerky way. The flat, 2D aesthetic is preserved. The construction paper textures, scanned from the original pilot, are still applied to every surface. It's an artistic choice that has become the show's visual identity. And it's a choice that gets more interesting the more sophisticated the technology behind it becomes. There's something deeply appealing about the most technologically advanced animation tools in the industry being used to simulate something a kid could make with scissors and glue. It's a metaphor for the show itself. Incredibly sophisticated craft in service of something that looks deliberately simple. The show's cultural impact can also be measured in the phrases it contributed to the English language. "Oh my God, they killed Kenny!" and "You bastards!" became ubiquitous almost immediately. "Respect my authority" entered the lexicon. "They took our jobs," in all its garbled variations, became shorthand for anti-immigration hysteria. "I'm not fat, I'm big-boned," became something overweight kids actually said, sometimes ironically, sometimes not. "Screw you guys, I'm going home," became a way to exit any conversation. The show generated catchphrases at a rate rivaled only by The Simpsons, and many of them had longer cultural half-lives because they carried satirical weight. And then there are the cultural touchstones that only exist because South Park made them. The Chin Pokemon episode from Season 3, which aired November 3rd, 1999, is perhaps the most prescient piece of media criticism the show ever produced. At the height of the Pokemon craze, South Park created Shin Pokemon, a fictional Japanese franchise that uses subliminal messaging and cultural appropriation to brainwash American children into becoming soldiers for the Japanese emperor. The episode's name itself is a crude joke, a Japanese vulgarity combined with mon. But underneath the crude humor is a devastatingly accurate critique of how media franchises manufacture desire and how corporations exploit children's need to belong. The episode was never aired in Japan, which tells you something about how accurately it hit its target. I actually have a theory about this that I've never seen anyone else bring up. I think Shin Pokemon predicted the entire trajectory of content marketing aimed at children over the next 25 years. The episode's depiction of a franchise that creates artificial scarcity, generates social pressure to collect, and embeds advertising so deeply into entertainment that children can't distinguish between the two. That's basically the entire business model of modern children's entertainment. Parker and Stone saw it coming in 1999. They wrapped it in a crude joke and a ridiculous plot about bombing Pearl Harbor, and the insight got dismissed as just another silly South Park episode. But they were right. Let me talk about the show's emotional depth, because this is where I think most casual critics of South Park get it wrong. The show is crude, yes. Offensive, absolutely. But it's also capable of genuine emotional power, and the moments where that power surfaces are among the most effective in all of television. Kenny Dies is genuinely affecting. Stanley's Cup, which parodies inspirational sports movies and ends with the children's hockey team getting brutally beaten by professionals, is devastating precisely because it refuses to give you the comforting ending you expect. South Park earned its emotional beats by spending years establishing characters that audiences care about, and then treating those characters' pain with surprising seriousness. And the animation style, which should theoretically limit emotional expression, actually amplifies it. When Stan's face falls, it's just 2 dots and a line rearranging by a few pixels. But because we've been conditioned to read emotion through those minimal shapes, the minimal change carries enormous weight. Less becomes more. A slight shift in Butter's mouth becomes the saddest thing you've ever seen. A subtle change in Cartman's eyes becomes terrifying. The crudeness of the animation forces you to project emotion onto the characters, which means you're doing the emotional work yourself, which means the feelings hit deeper than they would in a more detailed, more realistic style. That's not an accident. That's sophisticated visual storytelling disguised as a limitation. Look, I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to understanding everything this show is trying to do. South Park works because it refuses to be one thing. It's crude and smart. It's offensive and compassionate. It's simple-looking and technically sophisticated. It's politically engaged and philosophically ambivalent. Every apparent contradiction is actually a strength, because life itself is contradictory, and South Park is one of the few shows honest enough to reflect that. Let me get into what happened with the show's business model, because the financial story of South Park is almost as extraordinary as the creative one. The original deal in the late 90s established South Park as Comedy Central's flagship property. The merchandise alone, those t-shirts, the hats, the toys, generated enormous revenue. But the real financial earthquake came in 2021, when Parker and Stone signed a 6-year deal with Viacom CBS, reportedly worth $900 million. $900 million. For an animated show that costs a fraction of what a live-action drama costs to produce. The deal included new episodes for Comedy Central and 14 Paramount Plus exclusive movies, or events. And then in 2025, the deal got even bigger. Parker and Stone renegotiated, signing what reports indicate is worth roughly $250 million per year in overall deal value, plus a separate streaming deal valued at $300 million per year, totaling about $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion. For a show that started as a construction paper short made for $2,000. I need you to think about what that means. In an era when studios are cutting costs, canceling shows, and questioning the viability of streaming, Paramount is paying $1.5 billion for South Park, because they know it's one of the only properties that reliably draws audiences. Because they know Parker and Stone will keep the quality consistent. Because they know the show's brand is so strong that it's essentially critic-proof. Season 27, which began airing in 2025, proved the investment was worth it. The second episode of the season drew over 6 million global multi-platform viewers in its first 3 days, making it the most watched episode of South Park since 2018. After nearly 3 decades, the audience isn't just stable, it's growing. That's almost unheard of for a show that's been on the air this long. And I think the reason for that sustained success comes back to the production model. Because South Park responds to current events in real time, it's always relevant. You can't put off watching it, because you might miss the joke before it's no longer timely. That creates urgency, and urgency creates appointment viewing, which is the rarest and most valuable commodity in the streaming age. Other shows can be watched whenever. South Park demands to be watched now. Let me talk about the show's guest stars, because the way South Park handles celebrity appearances is unlike anything else on television. Most shows treat guest stars as events. South Park treats them as opportunities for humiliation. George Clooney, who was such a fan that he helped spread the original short, was invited to voice a character. The character was Sparky, Stan's dog. Clooney's performance consisted entirely of panting and barking. No dialogue, just dog noises, and he loved it. Robert Smith of The Cure appeared as himself in Mecha Streisand during Season 1, which aired February 18th, 1998. And this episode deserves a quick mention because it established a template that South Park would use for decades. Taking a real celebrity and turning them into a kaiju monster for a city-destroying battle. It's completely absurd. It's visually hilarious, watching these crude paper cutout characters smash through buildings. And it's weirdly affectionate toward Robert Smith while being absolutely savage toward Streisand. In the episode's climax, he transforms into a giant moth-like creature and fights a giant robot version of Barbra Streisand. The episode ends with the townspeople declaring, "Robert Smith is the greatest person who ever lived." Jennifer Aniston voiced a character. So did Jerry Seinfeld, though his bit was famously cut. Radiohead appeared as themselves in Scott Tenorman Must Die, calling Scott totally not cool in the episode's devastating conclusion. And the list goes on and on, but the pattern is consistent. Celebrities who appear on South Park are willing to be mocked, and that willingness is what earns them the invitation. I want to spend a minute on the show's relationship with the internet, because South Park and the internet grew up together in a way that's unique in television history. The show literally owes its existence to an early form of viral sharing. The spirit of Christmas shorts were among the first pieces of content to spread virally online. And as the internet evolved, South Park kept pace. South Park Studios launched as a streaming platform in 2008, making every episode available for free. This was revolutionary at the time. Most networks were terrified of online distribution, worried it would cannibalize ratings. But Parker and Stone understood that accessibility was the key to relevance. If people could watch South Park whenever they wanted, they'd talk about it more. And if they talked about it more, the live ratings would actually increase, because people wanted to be part of the cultural conversation. They were right. The show's move to various streaming platforms, from Hulu to HBO Max to Paramount Plus, tracked the evolution of the streaming wars themselves. And through it all, South Park maintained its identity. The episodes were still 22 minutes. The production cycle was still 6 days. The animations still looked like paper. In an industry obsessed with change, South Park's consistency became its greatest asset. And I want to quickly highlight the way the show handles holiday specials, because it's a microcosm of everything South Park does well. Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics from Season 3, which aired December 1st, 1999, is structured as a variety show of original Christmas songs, each one more offensive and more funny than the last. It's a loving parody of classic TV Christmas specials that also functions as a genuine holiday episode. You can watch it at Christmas and feel festive. You can also watch it as a deconstruction of how media manufactures seasonal sentiment. Both readings work simultaneously. Then there's the Halloween tradition. South Park doesn't do a Halloween episode every year, but when it does, the results are usually memorable. Spooky Fish, Korn's Groovy Pirate Ghost Mystery, and A Nightmare on FaceTime all take the horror genre and filter it through the South Park sensibility in ways that are both scary-ish and hilarious. The show treats genre the same way it treats everything else. as raw material for commentary and comedy, not as a set of rules to follow. And the Thanksgiving episodes, particularly the Black Friday trilogy from season 17, which aired in November and December 2013, show the show at its most ambitious and its most commercially savvy. The trilogy parodies Game of Thrones while satirizing Black Friday consumer madness and the console wars between PlayStation and Xbox. It's multi-layered in a way that rewards fans of Game of Thrones, gamers, and South Park devotees simultaneously. And the fact that the trilogy aired just as South Park, The Stick of Truth, was ramping up to its release date was not coincidental. The show was building hype for the video game through the episodes themselves, blending entertainment and promotion in a way that felt organic rather than cynical. Let me also spend a moment on something that doesn't get enough attention, which is the show's treatment of class. South Park is one of the only shows on television that consistently acknowledges economic inequality as a defining feature of American life. And it does so not through lectures, but through character. Kenny McCormick is poor, not sitcom poor, where the family has a modest house and occasional money worries. Genuinely, desperately poor. His family lives in a rundown house. His parents are alcoholics. His meals are sporadic, and the show never lets you forget this. Kenny's poverty is a constant presence, informing his perspective, limiting his options, and providing a counterpoint to Cartman's entitled selfishness and Kyle's comfortable middle-class morality. The brilliance of making Kenny the one who dies repeatedly is that it's also a commentary on how society treats the poor. They suffer. Nobody notices. Life goes on. The "oh my god, they killed Kenny" gag is funny. But it's also a dark joke about expendability, about how some lives are treated as less valuable than others, about how tragedy becomes routine when it happens to the people at the bottom. I don't think that's accidental. I think Parker and Stone embedded a class critique inside their most famous running gag, and most people were laughing too hard to notice. And while I'm on the subject of the show's surprising depth, let me talk about You're Getting Old, the 7th episode of season 15, which aired June 8th, 2011. This might be the most emotionally raw episode of anything I've ever watched. Stan turns 10 years old and suddenly starts seeing and hearing everything as something repulsive. Music sounds terrible. Movies look terrible. His friends annoy him. Everything that used to bring him joy is gone. The episode plays this as comedy initially, but it gradually becomes clear that Stan is experiencing something like depression. The world has lost its color for him. And in the final scene, Stan's parents separate. Fleetwood Mac's Landslide plays, and there's no joke. There's no punchline. There's just a kid sitting in his room while his world falls apart, and the construction paper simplicity of the animation somehow makes it more devastating, not less. I've seen Riersis suggesting this episode was semi-autobiographical, that Parker was working through his own feelings about getting older and losing the excitement that once drove his creativity. Whether that's true or not, the episode works because it earns its emotion. It doesn't reach for sentimentality. It doesn't tell you how to feel. It just shows you what depression looks like from the inside, through the eyes of a 10-year-old in a paper town, and trusts you to recognize it. The fact that the follow-up episode resolves the emotional crisis with a reset that almost feels too convenient, that's part of the point too. Life goes back to normal. The underlying sadness doesn't go away. It just gets pushed down. And anyone who's ever dealt with depression knows exactly how that feels. And I need to bring up the pandemic specials, because they represent something important about South Park's cultural role. When COVID-19 shut down the world in 2020, most television production stopped. South Park didn't. Parker and Stone produced The Pandemic Special, a 1-hour episode that aired October 1st, 2020, directly addressing the pandemic with the show's characteristic mix of absurdity and genuine observation. They followed it with several more specials, each tackling a different aspect of the pandemic experience, from vaccines to lockdown fatigue to the erosion of social trust. What made the pandemic specials particularly interesting was how they captured the emotional phases of the pandemic in real time. The first special was about the initial chaos, the confusion, the fear, the absurdity of a world shut down. The subsequent specials tracked the arc of public sentiment, from the initial solidarity to the growing divisions over vaccines and mandates to the general exhaustion of a crisis that went on far longer than anyone expected. And because South Park produced these specials within the context of the pandemic itself, they have a raw, immediate quality that retrospective pandemic content will never match. They're not looking back. They're looking around. They're capturing what it feels like to be in the middle of something nobody understands. I remember watching the first pandemic special and thinking, this is exactly what South Park exists for. When the world goes sideways, when everything feels uncertain and frightening and absurd, South Park is the show that says the quiet part out loud. It doesn't have answers. It barely has coherent positions. But it has the courage to articulate the confusion that everyone is feeling, to give shape to the amorphous anxiety of living through extraordinary times. And it does this through characters we've known for decades. Characters whose reactions feel predictable and comforting, even when the situations are unprecedented. Randy will overreact. Cartman will exploit the crisis for personal gain. Kyle will try to do the right thing. Stan will be overwhelmed. These patterns are reliable, and in unreliable times, that reliability has genuine emotional value. These specials mattered because South Park was one of the only voices in comedy willing to be genuinely uncomfortable about what was happening. While most comedians either avoided the pandemic or treated it with kid gloves, South Park ran directly at it. The specials weren't always successful. Some of the jokes didn't land. Some of the satire felt forced. But the willingness to engage, to say out loud the things that people were thinking but not saying, that was vintage South Park. That was the show fulfilling its most important cultural function, giving voice to the complicated, contradictory, often ugly feelings that serious events provoke. Okay, I want to talk about The Passion of the Jew from Season 8, which aired March 31st, 2004, because it's one of the most complex episodes the show ever made. The episode deals with the backlash to Mel Gibson's film The Passion of the Christ. Cartman, naturally, uses the film to fuel his already present anti-Semitic tendencies, marching through town in Nazi-like fashion. Kyle, meanwhile, watches the film and is so distressed by its depiction of Jewish guilt that he starts questioning his own identity. And the episode goes after Gibson himself, portraying him as a masochistic lunatic who physically attacks the boys. What makes this episode remarkable is how carefully it balances multiple targets. It mocks Gibson's movie without dismissing the genuine religious experience many people had watching it. It mocks Cartman's bigotry without letting Kyle's guilt off the hook. It was praised by the Anti-Defamation League and the Jewish Daily Forward, which called it one of the most effective critiques of The Passion to date. The Catholic League demanded an apology and didn't get one. And Comedy Central, recognizing they had something special, released the episode as a standalone DVD. That's a lot of different responses to 22 minutes of construction paper comedy. And I think the diversity of those responses is the point. South Park doesn't make episodes that people agree about. It makes episodes that people argue about. And in forcing those arguments, it contributes to public discourse in a way that most news programs and editorial pages can only dream of. Here's something I think about late at night when I've been watching too much South Park. The show's four main characters, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, represent something like the four possible responses to the chaos of modern life. Stan is the one who tries to do the right thing and usually fails. Kyle is the one who takes moral stands and is often undermined by his own self-righteousness. Cartman is the one who has given up on morality entirely and just pursues self-interest. And Kenny, who dies over and over and comes back, is the one who endures suffering without complaint. Together, they form a complete picture of the human condition, filtered through 8-year-old boys in a small Colorado town. And honestly, I think Kenny might be the most important character on the show, not despite his marginalization, but because of it. He's the character who experiences the most suffering and receives the least acknowledgement. He speaks, but nobody can understand him through his hood. He has opinions, but they're drowned out by Cartman's volume, and Kyle's righteousness, and Stan's protagonist energy. He's invisible. And in a show about how American culture processes suffering and spectacle, the invisible kid who keeps dying and nobody remembers might be the most honest character of all. And the beauty of it is that the show doesn't pick a winner. Stan's earnestness is admirable, but often naive. Kyle's morality is genuine, but often blind. Cartman's selfishness is monstrous, but often effective. Kenny's resilience is inspiring, but often ignored. None of them are presented as the correct way to live. They're all presented as incomplete. And the implication is that completeness comes from the tension between them, from the push and pull of these four approaches existing in the same space. I've never seen anyone else make this observation, and maybe I'm reading too much into a show about fart jokes. But I genuinely believe that the character dynamics on South Park are as carefully constructed as any prestige drama. The difference is that Parker and Stone would never admit it. They'd make a fart joke instead. Let me jump forward and talk about what South Park has done for animated comedy as a broader category. Before South Park, The Simpsons had proven that animated shows could be smart, but The Simpsons existed in a relatively safe space. It pushed boundaries gently. It was subversive, but never dangerous. South Park was dangerous. It proved that animation could tackle subjects that would be impossible in live action. Want to show a celebrity being dismembered? Animation can do that. Want to depict God as a bizarre hippopotamus-like creature? Animation can do that. Want to satirize a sitting president while he's still in office? Animation can do that with fewer legal consequences. After South Park proved there was a market for genuinely adult animated content, the floodgates opened. Family Guy, which premiered in 1999, 2 years after South Park, took the irreverent approach, but stripped away the social commentary. Adult Swim launched in 2001 and built an entire brand around the kind of after-midnight weirdness that South Park had helped legitimize. Later shows like Archer, Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, and Big Mouth all exist in a landscape that South Park helped create. Not all of them acknowledge the debt, but the debt is real. And here's the thing that I find most impressive about South Park's longevity. Most shows that depend on topical humor have a shelf life. Saturday Night Live reinvents itself every few years with a new cast. Daily Show-style comedy rotates hosts. Even The Simpsons, which has been on longer than South Park, is widely acknowledged to have declined from its creative peak. But South Park, after 27 seasons and counting, remains vital. Not every episode is a masterpiece. Not every season hits the same heights. But the show continues to produce episodes that generate genuine cultural conversation, and that's more than almost any other show can claim. I think the reason is the production model. Because the show is made in 6 days, it never stagnates. There's no time for staleness. Every week is a new crisis, a new idea, a new argument between Parker and Stone about what's funny and what's important. The speed of production forces spontaneity, and spontaneity is the enemy of formulaic thinking. Other shows plan seasons in advance, locking in storylines months before they air. South Park plans episodes the week they air. And that immediacy, that sense that you're watching something that was created in a frenzy of inspiration and caffeine and sleep deprivation, gives the show an energy that more carefully produced shows can never match. The 6-day cycle also means that the people making the show are always tired, always stressed, and always running on pure creative adrenaline. And I think you can feel that in the finished product. There's a rawness to South Park episodes that comes from not having time to polish the edges. Jokes that a more cautious show would smooth out or focus test stay in because there's no time to remove them. Lines that a more deliberate creative process would flag as too risky survive because the clock is ticking and the episode needs to be on the air in 4 hours. The show's imperfections are a feature, not a bug. They're what make it feel alive. And I want to take a minute to talk about the show's approach to technology episodes more broadly, because South Park has been one of the most consistent chroniclers of how technology changes human behavior. Make Love, Not Warcraft is the most famous example, but the show has tackled nearly every major tech shift of the past 3 decades. There's an episode about the internet going down that treats it like a natural disaster, with refugees fleeing their homes in search of connectivity. There's the Facebook episode we talked about. There's a whole arc about the NSA and government surveillance. Each time, The show doesn't just mock the technology. It looks at what the technology does to people, how it changes their relationships, their self-image, their sense of community, and it usually finds something disturbing underneath the comedy. I actually think South Park will be studied someday as a cultural archive of how Americans responded to technological change in real time. No other show was making episodes about World of Warcraft addiction in 2006, or Facebook anxiety in 2010, or internet trolling in 2016. And because these episodes were produced within days of the cultural moments they address, they capture the immediate emotional response, rather than the retrospective rearesis. Their primary sources. Future cultural historians looking back at the early 21st century could do worse than watching South Park season by season. I want to come back to something I touched on earlier, the show's emotional register. Because for all the vulgarity and shock value, South Park has a surprisingly consistent emotional undercurrent. It's nostalgic, not in the member berries weaponized nostalgia sense, but in a genuine human sense. The show returns again and again to the feeling of being a kid, of experiencing things for the first time, of not yet having the cynicism that adult life builds up in layers. The boys are perpetually 8 years old, and that frozen childhood serves as a reference point against which all the adult madness is measured. When Randy does something idiotic, the camera always returns to Stan's weary, long-suffering face. When the town descends into panic over the latest moral crusade, the boys watch from the sideline with the confused, clear-eyed perspective that only children can have. And in those moments, in the gap between the children's simplicity and the adult's complexity, lies the show's deepest emotional truth. Growing up means losing something essential. The adults of South Park have all lost it. The children haven't. And the show's humor comes from that loss. And its heart comes from the dim awareness that loss is inevitable. That's why the show can make you laugh at a fart joke, and then, 5 minutes later, make you feel something genuinely profound. The two responses aren't contradictory. They're connected. The fart joke reminds you of childhood. The profound observation reminds you of what childhood costs. And the oscillation between the two is what gives South Park its unique emotional texture. Okay, let me bring this into the present. Because South Park in 2025 and 2026 is a very different beast than South Park in 1997 or even 2010. The Paramount Plus deal has given Parker and Stone more creative freedom and financial security than ever before. Matt Stone said publicly that they can do whatever they want at Paramount, and you can feel that freedom in recent seasons. The show takes bigger swings. The production values are higher. The specials and events exclusive to Paramount Plus have allowed for longer-form storytelling that the standard 22-minute format doesn't permit. And I want to talk about the show's ability to create eras that feel distinct from each other, because this is something that long-running shows almost never achieve. The South Park of seasons 1 through 3 feels like a different show from the South Park of seasons 4 through 7, which feels different from seasons 8 through 12, which feels different from the serialized experiments of seasons 18 through 21, which feels different from whatever the show is becoming now in its late 20s. Each era has its own dominant concerns, its own emotional register, its own relationship with the audience. The early seasons are chaotic and experimental. The middle seasons are confident and sharp. The serialized seasons are ambitious and sometimes overextended. The recent seasons are reflective and self-aware. And through all of these shifts, the core remains the same. 4 kids, 1 town, an infinite willingness to say what nobody else will say. This is one of those episodes I think about at random moments and just start laughing. The losing edge. Randy Marsh, shirtless, being held back by other parents while screaming at a Little League umpire. It's one image, but it contains an entire commentary on modern parenting, on competitive culture, on the way adults project their own insecurities onto their children's activities. South Park can do more with one image than most shows can do with an entire season. But there's a tension there too. South Park was born as an underdog. It was the scrappy little show on the scrappy little network that nobody took seriously. Now, it's one of the most valuable properties in entertainment, worth more than $1 billion. Can a show that built its identity on irreverence maintain that irreverence when it's backed by that much corporate money? Can Parker and Stone still be the rebels when they're the establishment? These are questions the show itself seems aware of. There's a self-consciousness in recent seasons that wasn't there before, an awareness that the guys making fun of the establishment are now part of it. And I think that tension, rather than undermining the show, actually makes it more interesting. South Park has always been at its best when it's uncomfortable, and there's nothing more uncomfortable for a satirist than realizing you've become the thing you used to mock. If anything, this new financial reality gives the show its most interesting challenge yet. How do you maintain the outsider energy that made you great when you're the biggest insider in the room? Parker and Stone seem to be answering that question the only way they know how, by continuing to say whatever they want and hoping the audience follows. So far, it's working, but it's a tightrope walk that gets more precarious with every passing year and every additional zero on the contract. I think the answer, so far, is yes. And I think the reason is that the show's irreverence was never about money or status. It was about personality. Parker and Stone are constitutionally incapable of being careful. They showed up to the Oscars in dresses and on acid. They wrote a song called Blame Canada and submitted it for an Academy Award. They made a puppet movie about the War on Terror. They told Scientology and radical Islamic extremists to go to hell in the same decade. These are not people who moderate their behavior when the stakes go up. The stakes have always been high for them, and they've always responded the same way, by doing exactly what they want and daring the world to stop them. Let me talk about what the show has done with Mr. Garrison, because that character's journey is one of the strangest and most fascinating in all of television. Garrison started as a simple parody of a closeted, unstable elementary school teacher. Over the course of the series, he has undergone a gender transition, detransitioned, had various romantic relationships with both men and women, and in the show's most audacious move, became a stand-in for Donald Trump during his presidential campaign arc in seasons 19 and 20. The decision to use Garrison as the Trump Rhea Rogue rather than creating a new character was genius because it allowed the show to comment on Trump's appeal without having to depict Trump himself. Garrison's transformation from teacher to political figure mirrored the real-world confusion about how someone so seemingly unqualified could capture the national imagination. And when Trump actually won the election, disrupting Parker and Stone's planned storylines, the show had to scramble. But because they'd tied the political arc to an existing character rather than a caricature, they had something to work with. Garrison's horror at actually winning felt genuine because we'd spent 20 seasons with this character and understood his psychology. And I can't leave the subject of character evolution without mentioning Craig and Tweek, because their relationship is one of the most unexpected developments in South Park history. Craig Tucker and Tweek were paired together as a couple in Tweek X Craig from season 19, episode 6, which aired October 28th, 2015. The episode satirized the phenomenon of fan shipping, the practice of fans imagining romantic relationships between characters. The Asian girls at the school start drawing fan art of Craig and Tweek as a couple, and the town pressures the two boys into actually dating, despite neither of them being gay. But the twist is that the relationship works. Craig and Tweek genuinely start caring for each other, and the show played it straight. No pun intended. They remained a couple in subsequent episodes. It wasn't a one-off joke. It became part of the show's fabric. What I find remarkable about this is how naturally it was handled. South Park, a show known for being deliberately provocative about everything, treated the Craig and Tweek relationship with genuine warmth. There were no big dramatic coming-out speeches, no after-school special moments, just two kids who ended up together and whose relationship was accepted by the town without fanfare. In a strange way, it was one of the most progressive things the show ever did, and it did it by doing nothing. By treating a same-sex relationship between kids as completely unremarkable, South Park said more about acceptance than a dozen very special episodes on other shows ever could. That willingness to let characters change, to let them evolve in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable, is part of what gives South Park its narrative power. Most animated comedies keep their characters static. Homer Simpson in season 35 is essentially the same Homer from season 1, but South Park's characters are allowed to grow, to make choices that alter their trajectories, to become different people. It's a risky approach because it means the show can't always go back to the status quo, but it pays off in emotional depth and in the sense that the show's world has weight and consequence. I've been thinking about South Park for a long time now, putting this together, rewatching episodes, reading interviews, going through production histories. And the thing that keeps striking me is how unlikely all of it is. Two guys from Colorado made a cartoon with scissors and paper, and it changed American culture. Not gradually, not incrementally, fundamentally. Before South Park, there were things you couldn't say on television. After South Park, those limits were redrawn. Before South Park, animated shows were for kids or for gentle adult comedy. After South Park, animation was a legitimate vehicle for the most provocative ideas in entertainment. Before South Park, the gap between viral phenomenon and mainstream success was enormous. South Park bridged that gap before anyone had a name for it. And I want to talk about something that might seem minor, but that I think is actually crucial to understanding South Park's endurance: the opening theme song. Going Down to South Park has been part of the show since the beginning. It's changed over the years, evolved slightly, but the core remains the same. That tinny, cheerful melody, the boys walking to the bus stop, the familiar lyrics that any fan can sing from memory. In a show that thrives on chaos and unpredictability, the opening sequence is an anchor. It says, "You're home." Whatever insanity is about to follow, you're in a familiar place with familiar characters. And for a show that's been on the air for nearly 30 years, that sense of home is enormously powerful. People who started watching South Park as teenagers are now watching it with their own teenagers. The opening theme is the bridge between those generations. And this leads me to something I've been wanting to say for a while, which is that South Park might be the last true monoculture show. In the late 90s and early 2000s, when everyone watched the same handful of programs, South Park was one of the shows that everyone had opinions about. You either watched it or you knew someone who did. References to the show permeated daily life. Kids quoted Cartman at school. Adults discussed the political episodes at work. It was a shared cultural experience in a way that almost nothing is anymore. The streaming age has fragmented audiences so thoroughly that no single show commands universal attention the way South Park did at its peak. And while the show is still enormously popular, with 6 million viewers for recent episodes, it exists in a different landscape now. It's one of many options, rather than one of the only options. And the fact that it still manages to generate cultural conversation in this fragmented landscape is perhaps the most impressive thing about it. Let me put the numbers on the table, because they're staggering. The show has won 5 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program, for Best Friends Forever in 2005, Make Love, Not Warcraft in 2007, the Imagination Land trilogy in 2008, Margaritaville in 2009, and Raising the Bar in 2013. It received a Peabody Award in 2006 for its stringent social commentary and undeniably fearless lampooning of all that is self-important and hypocritical in American life. It spawned a feature film that was nominated for an Academy Award. Its creators won 9 Tony Awards for the Book of Mormon. It generated multiple best-selling video games, with The Stick of Truth alone selling over 5 million copies. It produced catchphrases that entered the dictionary of everyday speech and became part of how an entire generation communicates. It directly influenced public perception of Scientology, climate change, and media censorship. It survived death threats, corporate censorship, cultural shifts, and the transition from cable to streaming. And it's still going. After nearly 30 years, it's still going. And let me mention one more thing about the show's cultural impact that rarely gets discussed: its influence on political discourse itself. The concept of the South Park Republican entered the political lexicon in the early 2000s, coined by blogger Andrew Sullivan to describe a generation of young conservatives who were fiscally right-leaning but socially libertarian, who hated political correctness but also hated religious moralizing. Whether or not Parker and Stone intended to create a political movement, they gave a generation of Americans a vocabulary for expressing political ambivalence. The giant douche versus turd sandwich framework has been applied to virtually every election since 2004. The show's insistence that caring too much about anything is inherently suspicious resonated with millions of people who felt alienated by both major parties. For better or worse, and there's a genuine argument to be made for both, South Park shaped how an entire generation thinks about political engagement. And I have to be honest about the criticism this approach has received, because it's valid and it's important. The Vice article that argued South Park made it cool not to care raises a genuine point. The show's relentless both-sidesism, its insistence that people who care passionately about issues are just as ridiculous as the people causing the problems, can function as a form of political nihilism. If everything is equally ridiculous, then nothing matters. And if nothing matters, then there's no reason to try to change anything. That's a dangerous message, especially for young people who are forming their political identities. Parker and Stone would probably respond that the show isn't a political manifesto and shouldn't be treated as one. And they'd be right. But cultural products have influence, whether their creators intend it or not. And South Park's influence on political culture is more complicated than either its fans or its critics want to admit. There's a scene in the very first short, The Spirit of Christmas, where the boys are standing in the snow and the world around them is chaotic and violent and absurd. And they react the way kids react, with confusion, with curiosity, with the instinct that whatever's happening must have some explanation, even if the explanation doesn't make any sense. And nearly 3 decades later, that's still what the show is doing. It's standing in the middle of the chaos, looking around, and saying, in the voice of an 8-year-old, "Can you believe this?" One last thing before I wrap up. I've rewatched a lot of South Park putting this together, more than I probably should admit. And the thing that keeps striking me, the thing I keep coming back to, is how much the show still makes me laugh. Not in a nostalgic way, not in a "this used to be funny" way, in a genuine, present tense, caught off guard way. There are jokes in Season 3 that are just as funny now as they were in 1999. There are visual gags in Season 8 that I noticed for the first time on my 20th viewing. There are character moments in Season 14 that hit different now that I'm older and understand more about the people being satirized. The show rewards rewatching in a way that almost nothing else does, because every layer of experience you bring to it reveals new layers in the show itself. And I think that's the ultimate test of art, isn't it? Not whether it was important when it was made, though South Park certainly was. Not whether it was popular, though South Park certainly was that too. But whether it remains alive, whether it still speaks, whether it still makes you feel something. And after nearly 3 decades, South Park is very much alive. I want to thank you for staying with me through all of this. I know it's been a long one. If you made it this far, you know this isn't just about a cartoon. It's about what happens when 2 people with a genuine creative vision refuse to compromise, refuse to moderate, refuse to stop pushing against the edges of what's acceptable. And the answer is that they change the world. Not the whole world, not all at once, but piece by piece, episode by episode, fart joke by fart joke, they move the line. And when you look back at where the line used to be and where it is now, you realize just how far South Park has pushed it. This is a show that was made with scissors and paper and somehow became the most fearless piece of satire in American television history. A show that deliberately looks like it was made by children, but contains observations that most adult dramas couldn't articulate. A show that was never supposed to last more than 6 episodes, and is now approaching its 30th year with a $1 billion contract and an audience that keeps growing. In 1997, Comedy Central had 21 million subscribers, and a construction paper cartoon that tested terribly with focus groups. George Clooney was dubbing VHS tapes in his living room. 2 guys from Colorado had an idea that nobody believed in, and everything about the way we think about comedy, satire, animation, and the limits of free expression on television changed because those 2 guys refused to be told what they couldn't do. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. It helps more than you know. And share it with someone who loves South Park as much as we do. Because honestly, after going through all of this, after looking at everything this show has done and everything it continues to do, I'm more convinced than ever that there will never be another show like this one. There's always more to talk about with this show. There always will be. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.